Damn it! I mean, I've better things to do. Uh, Rather, I have better things that I should be doing than this. But no, let me find it now. The name of the video. So this is a response to. Uh, Sorry, I'm gonna find it now. Where's my YouTube? To Millennial 2020 Semiogogue. Semiogogue. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but yeah, from the Millennial. So I hope that this is a recent thing. It says that this is 2 days old, but okay. So I didn't listen to the whole thing. I listened to 35 minutes of it, or almost 36 minutes of it, and I just have to step in at this point because this is look. You're reacting to these SJWs and you shouldn't be reacting to them. It's stupid. I mean, I know why you're reacting to them is because you have a very similar worldview to them, in fact, and you just have a different narrative, essentially. I mean, you're doing the natural thing of reacting to. Let me put down my microphone so I'm not blaring. You are reacting to your natural prey, as it were, the natural useful idiot, which is essentially someone who believes in the same narrative structure that you do, just they are epistemological pluralists and you are somewhat conditioned by some kind of essentialism that's based in some kind of being conditioned by some kind of material substrate, which essentially you can only escape through some kind of collective blood uh, 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 ethno state or something like that, or something like that. Look, um, I think that there is a place for, at least in this time of history, there's a place for nationalism. There's a proper place for nationalism because that is how we, on a collective scale, can still maintain some kind of moral domain. Okay, I'm talking off the cuff. Let me talk specifically about what is being spoken about here. Like, why the hell do you care about what SJWs think? Oh, I guess you want to rescue their blood from their stupid brains. Is that what you want to reprogram them? You want to deprogram them and indoctrinate them with a better narrative upgrade? Is that it? Because some of them are on your side and your culture, your weak culture, was taken over by their utopianism or whatever. Um, okay, I would say stop arguing with them. Yes, they've taken over the academy. Well, to the extent to which that they've taken over the academy was weak and deserves to be displaced by other institutions. Make other institutions. Make a different place for yourself, as it were, and displace them not by fighting fire with fire, as it were. That's my recommendation in terms of, oh, they're arbitrary and you are the opposite of arbitrary. You are what, distinguished in your in the sophistication of the naturalism of your narrative. I mean, like, this is a false dichotomy. This is a false ideological firefight, and I want to get underneath it, but I can't find an easy way to do it because the comments made by Semiogogue, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, is itself, it misconstrues. And by the way, all of your thoughts are not original, by the way. Like, I can think of, it's a combination of about four thinkers, but I mean, if you, Scientology actually has, talks about how the creation of language, but also what you say does not even apply to Chinese script, which are, sort of pictograms and things like that, because there, each symbol itself is not it's only in the West that words are sound signs. There are other languages where the written word is not a sound sign. So, other languages you don't get homophones. We have homophones in the West here because our words are sound signs. But that's not, there is actually ambiguity anyway. There's always some level of ambiguity, but it doesn't happen on the level of, let's say, in look, I'm a Platonic metaphysician, so I can't get I have to use the divided line, sadly, to talk about it in a secular term. But essentially, When you're talking about opinions and notions, that's fine. Everything makes sense. That's easy. But then when you're talking about rationale and you're talking about intellectual forms, or there is ambiguity, sadly. When you say, "What should you do now?" or I say, "What would you like to do now?" What shall we do now? What ought we do now? Shall and ought, there's the ambiguity, and you can't get away from that ambiguity. Because uh, when I ask you, what shall we do? Now, we is the collective. So we is you and I. So what shall we do? Am I saying shall you take the lead of we? Or am I saying give me a suggestion for we to consider? That's ambiguous. If I say what shall we do, and you can tune into what I'm saying if you can click to the attenuation, to the tone, or to the practice of that we already have a social order, we already have an arrangement. Okay, so there's context that always matters to words, and in some sense, context will never be complete. Okay, unless you're just making if you're using language in the gross sense, and when I say gross, I mean it technically. I mean in the sense of the realm of the scene, the realm of the upper world, the realm of, but in the realms of the underworld, of the intellect, of the realms of the intelligible, the lesser of the greater, and the greater of the greater segments of the divided line, there is fundamentally ambiguity, and this is why spiritual tests. I mean, so yes, you can have your battlefield thing, but then notice that, and this is the fascistic dilemma essentially, or this somehow the life of that we're all going to be preserved in the life of the nation, some bullshit like that. We're all going to be preserved in the lineage of our ethnicity, or some bullshit like that, which is completely, unfulfilling, except to say, well, might makes right, and if we conquer everyone else, then that'll show everyone who said something different to what we had to say. It has that kind of disgusting, latent threat behind it, as essentially, well, we'll vindicate ourselves because we'll be the ones that actually were able to pass on our genes, and that's all we are. We are intercessors of this process, and somehow there's divinity in the blood and the soil, or some bullshit paganism like that. Um, Not that there isn't something very spiritual about the blood, but I would say that these people are locked in the abyss of their own blood iconism, or idolatry, essentially. I mean, this is a stupid idolatry. And if you try to actually have a culture, look, right now you could say, well, yes, this is a different perspective which is not being integrated by these stupid people, and I'll give you that. But there's no synthesis between your thing and their thing. It's just, yes, you can say that you're more reasonable than them, and yeah, that's the fascist game that you play. You have useful idiots, and you say, well, they're useful idiots because they're spreading our narrative. They're spreading the conceptual ingredients of the fascistic narrative, because they are promulgating the nihilism, which then hopefully will throw people into the camp of the authoritarian nationalisms or whatever. And what is the value of this shit, really, at the end of the day? So that you can just say that, oh, well, we're in it to win it as a group, and we're locked in this perpetual, uh, uh, you know, I mean, does this really work in a world with nuclear warheads? Does it really work? Uh, no, it doesn't. So let's just grow up a little bit historically. Let's just, look a little bit further than the immediate idiocy of the people around us. Now, I would say that let's see how useful your thing is. So you want to convert these useful idiots into fascists. Okay, go have fun. Go try that. And I'll just tell you that, like, what you should be working out is how to do is how to make institutions that are immune to their bullshit. But sadly, you're not interested to answer that question, because you don't care about institutional integrity, because for you it's all just an intercessor sort of part of perpetuating some breeding program or something. Because that's I mean, or you can say, well, we have nice things, but they only live inside of our bubble universe, and they're not relatable to other people because we haven't worked out how to universally communicate them, because we don't have a real understanding of ourselves. We just live in bubble universes because we're I mean, you have all this time and intellect, and what do you invest it into? You invest it into this dull, brittle intellectualism. To I mean, like literally, there were better people talking about the moral degeneration of Weimar Germany before they were taken out by the brown shirts. Um, there was a higher level of intellectualism, 90 years ago, uh, on display than there is now. But I mean, I guess I'm talking. I'm. It's not nice to have a recording like this where I'm essentially purely just I'm being condescending. But okay, let me talk about some technical things about language if I haven't already. The ambiguity. What to say about the ambiguity? I mean, it's weird for an intellectual or an academic even to talk in this way. Must be a sort of SJ, but I mean that in the MBTI jargon, which I don't follow MBTI, but I use it as an approximation often. But the Myers Briggs type indicator, the SJ type academic. Um, Let me just see. I think I've already covered everything, but yeah. So language, you could say language has its greatest effect in the realm of the scene because even notions, which are essentially functions, um, understanding is a notional thing. You have theories. You have to have theories in order to epistemologically source your opinions. So, opinions of fact, statements of preposition, the chair is on the table, put the chair off of the table. Like you have to be able to visualize prepositional uh, um, scenarios through language. And then, but, like the idea that of how you would enact any of these things are essentially because people already have theoretical schemas, as it were, or they even have large theoretical I mean, it doesn't have notions are essentially will never be more than conjecture, as it were. Um, and then there's a simultaneous sort of mystery. Damn, this is will I have it as my? I guess I could put it as the cover of this recording. I could put the four sides, the divided line. Um, but yeah, that's I guess where I would kind of try to talk people out of this kind of stuff. They're essentially that how to be justified with the theories that you use, because obviously in some sense a real understanding is not made out of theories, it's made out of deliberating between theories, having theories uh, um, about theories, meta theories, which in some sense has to be sourced within the rationale. And if your theoretical jujitsu is good enough, then essentially you can kind of reach the sudden between the opinion and the notional from the right side and not from the left side. Um, Man, I'm talking. This just sounds like gibberish. This can't even be you can't induct someone into this through a lecture. I think you have to kind of talk it out with them and introduce them to it. But in some sense, you have to understand all the mysteries of life in the rationale before you then actually make the key to open those mysteries. So you have to kind of know the two source of mysteries: the mystery, the great mystery, the singular mystery in the notional, and then the never-ending mysteries in the rationale of life. But essentially, um, there is a meta-rationality that essentially can create, let's say, a city in the clouds that is stable enough to traverse the fields of the such a weak metaphor. Anyway, and then the one, the good, in the realm of the greater, essentially is resonating or being recollected by the rationale, and in some sense the one is stayed, because it's never that is always there. It's always permanent, as it were. And you are just, your rationale is in a form that essentially is picking up the vibration of the antenna of that. It is a kind of and essentially, when your rationale is somewhat tarnished or something like that, then essentially what you're doing is you've got a sort of a glass screen between the rationale and the intellect, and you're kind of, there's a fault in the glass, and you're seeing the one as being divided against itself, or sort of there's a crack in the and so you need a rational matrix that is capable of receiving a kind of vibrational, I mean, this is a metaphor, um, and trying to align the clouds so that you can see the truth inside of the fragments of truth inside each of them, perhaps, but there's maybe a special cloud there. But even if you find the door, you need a key to unlock it, which is that you hope to have an understanding. And sadly, this whole thing that this guy is going on about, Semiogogue or whatever, is that he's bought the narrative of the world, as it were, which is not, it's not an untrue narrative. It just means that if you're going to buy into that narrative, you're going to be locked into the lesser, or the upper world, as it were, and you're not going to have any any understanding of the underworld. Um, and when you close your eye to the enemy in the underworld, it doesn't disappear, sadly. And the ambiguity, as it were. I mean, this is why even in Nazi Germany, I mean, the people became stupid. You do realize that I mean, there's testimony of children that grew up in Nazi households, and they commented on how pathetic their parents were. And this is not propaganda. I mean, I take this, I mean, as psychological testimony that they realized that their culture was literally degenerating around them, and it was propped up only by essentially perpetuating this constant war, which is the same constant war which is being trumpeted by the social justice warriors, that essentially this narrative warfare, this never-ending infiltration of whatever you might call it. And in some sense, this is, watch a Jordan Peterson video about Nietzsche and talking about Jung, and talking about how uh, Nietzsche basically predicted that when people became epistemological pluralists, which is exactly, I mean, you just call your epistemological pluralism the natural state of ethnic war or something like that, the natural state of genetic, um, you know, as if it was like, I'm sorry that you don't have the words to convince other people to change their behavior. Um, but well, I say that, I guess maybe I'm a liar when I say that. I mean, if you, what do you want? You want sympathy. Do you really expect that someone should give you sympathy because you have an inability? I mean, your inferiority is showing. Excuse me. Um, but I mean, I guess I'm humble enough to say, well, those that I cannot convince, I I let free. They can go make their own way. But I will have a fight over the institutional power. I will have a fight over the form that the law takes. I will. That's where I'll make my stand. I mean, look, I do. Different cultures have different systems. I happen to live in a wonderful legal tradition in which I am empowered to make a stand. I am empowered to have the good fight, as it were, and I believe that the law is on my side, although the jurisprudence has been corrupted and is currently not on my side. But I believe that in my system it's capable of being overthrown, it's capable of being changed, and in some sense, I mean, I imagine many things because I mean, the kind of rebellion that I would counsel, at least in my own position to myself, speaking to myself, is with a quorum of judges. I would uh, seek independence from the federal jurisdictional ambit. I'll found a new constitutional court to seek protection for the true constitutional values. I mean, I don't, I'm willing to go to the ends of the earth for my, uh, uh, at least comportment of the structural integrity and the vision that I have for these things. But I mean, that's sort of beside the point. I mean, in the American circumstance, you're completely screwed. There is no help for America as far as I can see. The Constitution itself is fundamentally defective. Um, but I mean, I don't know how. I mean, obviously, Millennial Woes himself is not an American. But I mean, this is what happens when you essentially formulate a country in the image of the French Revolution, and then you create a whole goated culture of people that are not interested in. I mean, I can't talk too broadly with too broad a brush stroke because it's. I think there are people that have enough sentiment and estimation about the cultural defect in America that presents itself as a political polarization and a moral polarization and a journalistic narrative polarization. But essentially, what I see it all as is it's a failure of the judiciary, because whenever you lose in court in a moral based on a moral claim, it's because the legislature hasn't conferred enough power to your side of the partisan aisle or something like that. Every time a social justice warrior loses a case, they are, when they listen to the judge talk, all the judge is saying is, you don't have enough political power yet. That's the Napoleonic corruption talking. It doesn't, because there is no independent morality for the individual citizen, because you don't have real constitutional rights in America. I mean, I'm kind of, excuse me for generalizing, but I would say Britain also has another version of this defect to some degree, but it's much more forgivable in the British case, if I do say so myself. Um, and I'm not going to repeat all the things, but I've made many comments on Lord Sumption's wreath lectures to try, but anyway, I'm digressing, and no one's going to follow this anyway. But I mean, this is a massive subject. Um, but you want to ground things in a basic state of war. I mean, oh, you've just reinvented. Damn, I don't even know his first name, so I sound very unintelligent. But is it Thomas Hobbes? The Leviathan. I mean, so you've just oh wow, oh wow. So language plus the Leviathan. I mean, this is all the fascists can ever do. It's so stupid. Um, I mean, do you not see how you are the exact, somewhat polar mirror reflection of these social justice heathens? Excuse my French, perhaps, but yeah, I mean, I would say that you've gotten on to this topic because it's the wrong topic to get onto, because your question should not be how do I convince these people and how do I defend against these people. It should be, why isn't that the law itself and that the form that the structure of the society takes, why is it prone to this kind of sophistry? But then you would also have to look at your own side and your own camp and realize that your values, it I mean, you've just fulfilled the Nietzschean prophecy yourself. You have just the highest values devaluing themselves. That you're going to combat them with nihilism. You're going to combat them with, oh well, we're good at finding food so that we can outcompete the other tribes, so we'll have to regress to that kind of narrative, otherwise we won't be able to stabilize our civilization and culture if we don't sort of perpetuate an eternal cold war between different civilizations. Well done, Semiogogue. I don't know. I mean, this is. I mean, I don't want to. I call everything pseudo intellectualism, but I mean, this is why you're. I can't. How many times can I just say grow up? Because this is just. It's like two little boys masturbating together side by side. That's what I'm looking at when I look at Millennial, Woes, and Semiogogue. And they're like, our narrative's better than their narrative. Let's make a tree house and then we'll get them one by one, or something like that. I guess I can't make all these horrible claims that I'm making when I only listen to 36 minutes of their exchange. And I guess I didn't hear Millennial Woes' retort, as it were, or if they just continued to excite themselves in the reveling of essentially another thematic coup against their their arch fodder and uh, uh, because it's supposed it's the natural order that the useful idiot must either be converted or they must be tossed aside or something like that. But the problem is that you're in a framework. First of all, I mean, do you really think that there was no good reason why Hitler lost the war? I mean, do you really think that somehow it was just like uh, that that like, why did he lose then? Like, if it was such a good idea, you know. I mean, yes, and it did resonate with a lot of people. It resonated with a lot of the people that need narratives, let's just say, and that maybe want to live in a faithless society, and they want to be able to consume their superiority out of the propaganda of their nation state and be accorded some kind of bestowed and gifted and granted and infantilized high status. And how long does that really last? I mean, you realize how much of a joke that was in Nazi Germany. How many times did Hitler have to say, oh, please, let's give more thought to the poor Aryans because they are still part of us. They are still within us, and that they must still have a kind of token high status, and this is if you're going to ground language in tokens, I mean, anyway, then everything just becomes. I mean, this is the strange hollowing out of meaning in some sense. I mean, well done. You've created a nihilistic mechanism in order to combat the fires of another form of nihilism that comes from a more overt, let's say, epistemological pluralism, whereas your epistemological pluralism has a kind of, in some senses, it's kind of existential nihilism. I mean, look, I know maybe I'm sounding convoluting these issues, but I mean, in as much as you say that they are being arbitrary, they will say that, well, although you are being rooted in an individual, at least in an individual perspective, that individual perspective is only held up by some vague form of relatability to the rest of your so-called collective, or something like that. And if you're not going to extend, and then you're going to say, well, yeah, my genealogy evolved and adapted according to a certain enculturation, into a certain conventional conglomeration of stored up thingamabobs, and I have grown accustomed to these things in my, what are you gonna say, in my when I was growing in my mother's tummy. Is that, I mean, like, I don't, like, where, how far the hell do you think you get when you make yourself an animal, when you make yourself a languaging animal? you know oh yeah, we can, obviously we individually can't be ubermensch, but as a collective we can be a nation of the ubermensch, because we'll just create a mythology. Then we'll just create a fake religion, and we'll say that the blood and the soil is magical when it's combined, and that's why our blood must own its soil, or some crazy bullshit like that. um and see how far you get before you actually start grunting again. Or certainly some of them are very much grunters in the high command. I'm just trying to think, who was the fat one called again? Um, it was a Goering was the fat one. It's weird because you only get this ring at the top, this circle of people at the top. Somehow, supposedly, you just have to believe that the cream always rises to the top. Um, and you've got this ivory tower with an escalator, or a, what is it? A ivory tower treehouse people. All these sorts of armchair commissars, and just trying to think. I mean, the only way that they get away with themselves is if they create a kind of a special place. What do they call it? Like the SS or something, or they create this special faction, or the special, and then eventually they cannibalize their own people, because they say, well, the other ones don't really get it, so that it just becomes gradations of purity, sort of sanitizing itself. Uh, because I mean, if you don't have an external enemy to perpetuate this narrative of let's say some kind of evolution. I mean, let's just say you take over everything. Well, I mean, it's almost a curse to do that, because then there's nothing more. Um, how far does that fucking narrative get you, basically? It doesn't get you very far if you just think about it for longer than 5 minutes. And the idea that, oh, you've got an alternative schema to these useful idiots. Well, the word idiot is in there for a reason. Um, Maybe you shouldn't try to upgrade their schema. Maybe you should actually demolish it and start afresh, as it were. Stop reacting, essentially, is what I'm saying. And now I'm babbling way too much. But sadly, there's not much more for me to say about this topic. I mean, how many times have I tried to debunk millennial woes? I mean, I say tried as just a technical nicety, but I mean, I would say that I've accomplished many a time to do just that. But it becomes boring at some point because there's just so little substance. It's just the same bag of tricks rearranged over and over again, and it doesn't even conform to an understanding. It's just loose. It's the same party tricks, and you loosely shake them up, and then you bring them out again in a new order, and you slap some new labels on it, and you've got a playmate. Imagine if you didn't have the SJWs. How would you even? Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, I'm talking rubbish. Half of this is a bit rubbish, but I mean, it's sadly it's hard not to devolve into this kind of rubbish when you're dealing with people that are dealing with such base material concerns. Which, I mean, first of all, let me just say, base material concerns are not a non-issue. They are the difference between survival and non-survival. Uh, but in some sense, uh, human beings have not lived hand to mouth in at least in society for quite some time. Um, at least not in many places in the world, and not uh, in places where one's parents have put in the requisite, let's say, responsibility, as it were. So that being a necessary caveat for me to underline, as it's very hard to find people living hand to mouth where, let's say, their parents had not responsibly planned, uh, and you could say where the government had not irresponsibly let loose the hounds of hell, or the utopian promises and dystopian returns of lies and such. That even in societies in which there have been a great hardship, people had not even lived. I mean, even if you look at the Great Depression and things like that, uh, there wasn't, people went a bit hungry, but there wasn't starvation. The kind, I mean, the kind of, there were bread lines, um, and you got a piece of bread. Um, anyway, and I would also say that there are things that need to be understood, and there are things that need to be rectified in systems, in structures, and the hard structures of society are certainly defective and not fit for purpose, and need to be ordered. They need to be rectified, and then I think we would have a much more harmonious platform and edifice upon which to proceed and conduct our affairs, and in which the right amount of orientation culturally would be made possible, uh, um, and liberal free choice then and self-determinism can actually take root, and there is some, at least structural, guarantee that institutional corruption, let's just say, is at least capable of being resolved if it is essentially understood well enough that it can be put to the right uh, uh, judicial process. Look, I'm talking a lot, but I would say that that is what we are in want of. We don't need another conjecture. We don't need another ideology. We need some sound judgment, and we need a structure of law that is capable of maintaining a certain inculturation of the right amount of sanctity in the intellect itself, because anyway, I'm talking a bit esoterically, um, and then I think culture would actually follow. I think a lot of this cultural decadence and degeneration is to some degree because we give expertise to people that do not deserve it. We give expertise to psychiatrists and psychologists, and with their big words, they have allowed things like the social justice movement to take off. But what does this so-called intellectual do? Semiogogue? Does he care about the psychologists? He just goes on about language. I mean, or maybe he links that up to how psychology has become essentially even to even think it was even possible that it could become even more depraved and hollow and vacuous and misleading of itself into some kind of nihilistic, fatuous. I can't even. I mean, it's been corrupted by sociology essentially. I mean, that's how weak a field it is. It essentially has allowed itself to imbibe and be completely shadow puppeted by whatever stupid sociological moral philosophy of social justice and it's I mean, if anything, I guess social justice has to be regarded as some kind of sociological poison narrative. And you think, well, sociology is actually made up of individuals. It's not the other way around. But this is the problem with the fascists: is they actually believe in the sociological ultimate metaframe in some sense that is populated by individuals, and so the individual must see its language as being rooted in the token, not rooted. I mean, so look, yeah, you could say that there has to be a residual token to root the word to, but how about the individual that taught the first word, that taught, i.e., the mimicry, because that's essentially what it is that I'm making a sound to mimic the thing, and then I'm teaching you to use the same sound to refer to the thing, and the reference doesn't even happen uh, 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 conventionally until the reference is communicated. And what is being communicated? A shared understanding. And who contemplated the shared understanding first? It was the individual. It was a single individual, in fact, that did so. Unless you want to say it was a complete fucking accident. And then, even if you do want to say that, what gives you the right to say that? And this is the arbitrariness of your own intellectual framework. At the end of the day, uh, it's it's essentially slanderous, and the only way that you get away with that slander is that you excuse yourself because you say, "Well, we're at war, so it doesn't matter if I use the word correctly or not, as long as you did what I thought I wanted you to make you do. It doesn't really matter because then together we succeed. In as long as we win together, then it doesn't matter if we shared the same understanding or not, because essentially our minds are islands, but our genes are mimetically abridging those islands or some bullshit like that. And so we have a kind of magical blood and we have an alienated and isolated understanding. That's what the fascist is, essentially, at the end of the day. Um, and maybe you'll stay with us forever as we continue to evolve. Maybe, hopefully, we overcome these social justice warriors. Maybe we have a third a thermonuclear world war to live through, and maybe we get through that and you still stay with us, and then maybe you go out when we start going into space, if we make it there, and maybe you become the gray aliens with the big heads that try to live forever and they can't even, maybe that's what all those archetypes, the gray aliens, mean. Maybe that's your section of humanity to evolve toward. Um, because then maybe you plug into a computer matrix where you can actually experience your understanding uh, of each other through some kind of interface, because everything just became so much more. I mean, just imagine the requisite technology that would be needed in order for you then to sate yourself. I mean, imagine if you could shrink yourself down to a minute size, then quadru- you could multiply the resources available to your genetics so many fold by however much you made yourself tiny, and then you could make yourself a nice safe place that had very thick shielding to it, so that if the sun ever blew up, then maybe you would still be contained within this thing. Maybe you could find a way in which you could kind of create a quantum thing that you could put yourself inside of, so that it would be encapsulated in a kind of field of potential possibility, that your essence could be contained. I mean, okay, now I'm getting a bit too fanciful and magical, but I mean, how many devices would you have to create in order to satiate the narrative of that? Well, we're practically at war. I mean, is that really how you're going to hitch yourself to this frozen, perpetual war of trying to maintain your biology? Do you believe in the everlasting life of anything, or is it all contingent? Because if it is all contingent, then what's the matter anyway? Really, what's the point of it anyway? Do you really have no appreciation of the mystery? Uh, is the mystery over? When did the mystery get finished for you? How old were you? Or is it just? I mean, I can't speculate further, but then you have to watch out, because maybe I'm just trying to corrupt you and infiltrate your minds with my Jewish magical. Well, I mean, I can't say that, because maybe many of the Jews would not be happy with that identity. I mean, I'm certainly Jewish in my lineage, but only partially. So I mean, I'm sure that puts me somewhere on the watch list, perhaps, of the dangerous people that need to be um, sorted out at some time, in some place, in some people's worldviews.